We appreciate the opportunity to visit with the governor. As you know, our preference had been that he would come before the public group and chat with us about the possibilities. The governor is restated his position once again that permanent revenue, he will not consider permanent revenue. We, of course, view that as a negative because we don't see how you can stabilize the budget without permanent revenue. The governor is very much interested in the $1.8 billion shift, which you know the Senate thinks is not a very good idea. But as we've stated in a letter, if it's contingent on permanent revenue, we could perhaps consider that. And I think the governor is going to make a proposal to us to close the gap without permanent revenue of $1.2 billion in additional cuts. And he's going to do that in the next few hours, and we will give that due consideration. And we assume there will be some specificity in that $1.2 billion in cuts.
There may be a need for public input in the next 24 hours on this $1.2 billion in cuts. And I think everyone around the room acknowledged that no one, Republican caucuses or Democratic caucuses, do not know if there are votes to pass an additional $1.2 billion in cuts depending on where they fall in the governor's proposals. It's very clear today that the governor has heard us that we are not going to do the appropriation bond going forward. I'm not going to speak for him, but I will just say that it has become very clear to members of the legislature that it is an unwise choice. It is one that leads to an addiction for future legislators and governors about how to solve tough fiscal problems. And for Minnesotans, what it means is that the interest payments on those bonds would mean those interest payments can't be invested in our hospitals, schools, or nursing homes. And so it's become very clear to us bipartisanly that that is not a line we want to cross in Minnesota. It makes us look much more like the federal government in terms of deficit spending. And we have no desire to go to Washington, D.C. In the legislature. And so we are not interested in that proposal. I believe the governor, for the most part, has removed that proposal from his offer. And we obviously still have a vetoed tax bill sitting out there that is connected to schools, hospitals, and nursing homes. And so our preference is still that you actually make those critical investments and stabilize the budget.
I think there was a general discussion that the Healthcare Access Fund would not be used for anything other than healthcare. We're very pleased that the governor has come to our position on that. We're not going to take that revenue to try to balance the budget. It perhaps could be in play in regard to dealing with healthcare issues. And then I think we did ask, do you have additional ideas for permanent revenue? The governor does not, or did not offer any. We asked that constantly. And I just want to make this point. The Senate's position, and I believe the House's, is any use of a shift has to be backed up by some ability to pay that back someday. And that's why we think you need permanent revenue. So it would be contingent. Any use of a shift would be contingent on a fiscally stable budget over the next 4 years.
I guess, and I'm sorry, the one other piece, because you all can't be in the room, the other piece that was brought up, I guess, was gambling. And it was brought up by the Republican legislators, and there was a disagreement between the governor and the Republican legislators. Representative Seifert and others said, is this gambling thing going to work? And the governor said no, flat out. So that was, I guess, the only other part of the discussion that you all missed by not being in the room.
If the override is attempted and Republicans say they're solid and they say it's not going to happen, if it is attempted and it fails, what then?
I think we're not at that point yet. I think the point we're at today is there's actually another offer on the table from the governor with cuts alone. Do this with cuts alone, and we have to see if there's any support in the legislature for that. But we're now going to wait in the next few hours to see what the details of those cuts would be, and then I think Democrats and Republicans both are going to have to see, are there the votes to do this cuts alone?
And both of those cuts have to come from higher ed and education. Are those the major bills that are left out there right now?
Well, I think that, the fact is that you can revisit any bill that's been passed already. So in some cases, the governor had increased spending in some bills. You might want to revisit that. Obviously, cuts to local governments, cuts to counties, cuts to direct property tax relief to individuals, further cuts to hospitals could be part of the governor's proposal here. It's very clear the governor is willing to go back and cut in the higher education area further, and I think that's kind of the main things that he talked about. But we don't have details on kind of level of cuts, where they would fall, what types of things that he would do. So,
Madam Speaker, just so we're absolutely clear, leadership won't go the cut route without some sort of new revenue. I mean, am I understanding you all correctly?
well, I think that we are evaluating what the governor is going to send us here. We think that it's far wiser to stabilize school budgets, hospital budgets, and nursing home budgets by putting some amount of revenue on going into this budget. The governor is very entrenched on his thinking on this. He does not seem to want to budge on it, but we are still interested in finding a way to make that happen.
Will the tax
I just want to add one thing. I want to make one thing very, very clear to the governor's office, to the public. In the Senate, we will absolutely not provide the votes to do something that we do not think is in the best interest of the state. This will not be a replay of the governor's actions in a previous budget cycle. There will not be a leadership agreement to do something that is not in the interest of the state.
What kind of leverage do you have here? Because the governor can on a lot anyway. You know what I mean? To go the route and to try to get that additional revenue. In this scenario, how can you?
We are obviously trying to examine, and we've asked him for further detail. We absolutely do need to understand what his authority is, what he can and cannot do. I think he's overstated his authority, but we will see. But our emphasis today and for the next 2 days will be on getting a negotiated settlement that is balanced, fair, and shared sacrifice. We are absolutely not interested in the governor flexing his muscles to show how powerful he is. Again, I believe he has overstated his power, but obviously in a constitutional form of government, he can wield whatever power he has. My suggestion is that he wield the power of what's in the best interest of the state for the next 2 days. And we think that's a balanced, shared sacrifice solution that brings budget stability for the long-term future of education and healthcare in our state. Thank you.
You're not going to accept a shift unless it's tied to a tax increase or fee increase?
Budget stability, yes, absolutely. We are not, I want to be very clear, we are not going to accept a solution that appears to solve the problem. A masked solution that kicks the solution down the road for future generations. That is not in the interest of the state. You will not see a press conference with the leadership of the legislature standing with the governor on something that doesn't actually solve the problem.
What other forms of budget stability are there besides a tax increase or a fee increase?
Do you have another meeting scheduled, Senator?
This afternoon, and there will be an expectation that an offer would come back from the Democrats after the governor's proposal is unveiled this afternoon. I thought we had a good discussion and hopefully some impetus to get finished by Monday night.
And we're I think making some progress, and that's good. And I think we accept it for what it is. It's a start, and we have a chance, I think, now to continue negotiations through the weekend and maybe arrive at something we can all agree to.
We understand the governor shut down gambling proposal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, the discussion item was more focused, I think, on the Democrats saying that they can't pass it off the floor. On the House side, you know, 67 votes, which is a tie with 3 members missing, with a lot of arm twisting and board holding open and all the rest of it. So Senator Poggemiller made it fairly clear that he didn't think the votes were there to pass it, and so I think the governor didn't want to initiate any type of further discussion on it if they can't get the bill off the floor.
Let me just say I'd characterize the same thing in the Senate. We all know where that one is with respect to the Senate majority and they're not going to go anywhere on gambling, and
if mines,
plus the governor's not either.
If the fiscal crisis gets worse through the rest of the year into the next biennium, I would think there are going to be some Democrats who are going to be changing their minds on an issue like this, and it depends on what it is, but I haven't been a big fan of gambling and so forth, but I think, we talked about having all discussion points on the table, and so I think we have to go through the menu of items. The Democrats made it very clear they did not want to do the tobacco bonds. They made it very clear that they didn't think they could get a gaming bill off the floor. The governor is willing to do the House DFL shift on K-12 in a spirit of compromise and meet them halfway in some other critical categories. And I think that shows that the governor is willing to put a deal together that moves more toward their position in a statesmanlike way.
Are you prepared to support another $1.2 billion in budget cuts?
We have to see details, and I have to talk to my caucus, but we're always willing to look at every piece that's put on the table, but we don't have those finalized right now.
Is there a
No,
possibility that
this is all
cuts-
unfolding. Exactly. I mean, I think, we can't go too fast here. We've got to just slow it down and see what the stuff looks like and make some assessments.
I would remind you that in 2003, when we had a budget deficit that was this significant, we had 81 seats in the Minnesota House, and we passed 10 finance bills, and collectively among those 10, we had 2 Democrat votes with Mr. Entenz's group. So when the Democrats parade out that my caucus is somehow responsible for passing their bills and balancing the Minnesota budget, we will certainly consider everything, and we did have bipartisan support for a lot of their bills because we did feel that there may be a sense of cooperation. We passed the Ag and Vets bill unanimously. But I would also tell you that there's a responsibility in governing when you have 87 people in your caucus.
Do you have any concerns that if these budget cuts could come out, that they could anyway hurt the veto override strength that your caucus says it has, that it could?
We're solid on the veto override. We've talked about it ad nauseum. If the Democrats had the votes, they'd have probably done it by now. I'd encourage them to bring it up today. If they're interested in the GAMC line item, bring it up. If they're interested in the tax increases, bring it up. We are ready to roll. And they are both House files, and so they have to start with us first. And so we are ready to roll. What I would say is that instead of getting into the rhetorical political games and the name calling of calling the governor King Tim and all of this, which I don't think is very statesmanlike, I think we should sit down and negotiate out a good settlement rather than the whole political posturing. But if they do want to bring up the veto overrides and test us, they are certainly willing to do that. That's part of the process.
Mr. Leader, the majority leader of the Senate said that they're not going to go the route of the shifts or any sort of cuts unless there's new revenue. Can they back that up? Can they back up that position?
Well, let me just say, this is all in progress right now. We're, he can say that, but look, it's Saturday morning, and he's going to have to talk to his caucus, and this is all fluid. This is all flexible, and that's where he is right now. But let's see where he is maybe this evening.
Any observations?
I mean, these things are, positions change. I understand they want to say that, but we're not going down the road of tax increases on working families, and the reality is that's what they want to do. It's just not going to happen, and so I think the rank and file caucus members are going to have to ask themselves: are we going to be in the same boat as potentially everything falling apart? And I don't think the average rank and file legislator of either party believes that's responsible.
What's the difference between the governor shifting and allotting $1.2 billion, or are you guys having to maybe consider a vote for it? Wouldn't it be easier to just have the governor do it, and you won't have to take all these tough votes?
Well, there's some interactions in House. The schools that are in statutory operating debt, and there's about a baker's dozen of those out there, that if you can do it legislatively, it's just like unallotting GAMC. We can do that. The governor has broad sweeping authority on various ways of doing this, just like when he's unallotted 2 times in his gubernatorial career. For example, with LGA, he shielded towns of under 1,000 last December because he felt that was a little bit more sensitive. But what I would say is that there are interactions with other funds that if you negotiate out a settlement, the Healthcare Access Fund could potentially be tapped to cushion the blow for those who may be vulnerable. If the Democrats truly care about those folks, as we all do as fellow Minnesotans, I think it would behoove them to do it in a legislatively negotiated way. But if they don't want to go down that route, the unallotment route is there, but it's a little bumpier ride, I think, and a little more turbulence than if we did it legislatively. But if we have to do that, it is on their shoulders right now to get it done in a more negotiated way rather than in the turbulent way. But we're prepared to go either way.
If the governor provides a list this afternoon of $1 billion+ in budget cuts, would you be willing to vote for those?
We have to see what the details are. We're working with him on that. I have to talk to the caucus. But at the end of the day, it's 87-47 in the Minnesota House, and it is 46-21 in the Minnesota Senate.
Right.
And as I said earlier,
we
got no votes from them in 2003, and so
you'll supply zero.
We don't know. We have to look what the details are and so forth. But there's.
Don't support the governor's fund?
But we have to see what they are. We may or we may not. As I said, when the bills came out this session, we supported some. Ag and Vets was unanimous. The K-12 bill had no votes from my caucus, and the tax bill had no votes. So we have to kind of take a look and see what the interaction is, and we're working with him on it. It's tough to support something that you're still working on.
Philosophically, you support the budget cuts, but you're not necessarily willing to vote for them, is what I'm hearing.
We'll have to see what the details are.
That's right.
Do you have a broad categories of development? Do you have some idea where?
Well, we're still working on the details. The House Democrats made a good case that we should come to their position on the shift, and I think a lot of the other categories, the governor is very likely to come up with a compromise halfway between his original proposal and where the Democrats were during the session. I think to the average Minnesotan that sounds reasonable.
What did you talk about with the governor after the Democrats left?
How's the
Where
family?
we are.
And
let me just say, and maybe back to this question. We don't know exactly, where this is going to be taking us right now in terms of specific details. I don't think there's any question that we're willing to certainly work with the majority caucus and the governor to try to find that common ground. That's what we're here today to do. And absent any other revenue, yes, there are going to have to be some cuts. And we're going to have to accept that and try to negotiate what those cuts are and make them work to the at least general agreement. None of us are probably going to like them, but we're going to have to make them work to the general agreement of certainly 34 votes.
Okay, now how about back to this question? Did you talk about possible areas where you might, what this agreement might look at?
There's various scenarios we threw around, but that'll be released this afternoon. I got to run up to the floor.
Can you tell us what the governor said about gambling?
Yes, I can. Well, Bill had a question, but I'll do that one first. When it comes to gaming, the Democrats in the Minnesota legislature have shown that they are unwilling to pass those bills. So we recognize that is the status of those measures. I think in the Senate there was a bill for electronic pull tabs that got less than 10 votes overall, and the governor has said, we've been down that path before, and he's not interested in going down that path again. So that was the conversation, but we recognize that the legislature is not inclined to pass that. You can consider and look into the reasons for that on your own. I think you're probably aware of most of the background information there. But that is part of the conversation that they had. The legislature acknowledges that they are not going to pass those bills regardless.